Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live, talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynn@pghcitypaper.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
All right, here. Look, it's an annual event. It's like Christmas.
Oh,
yeah.
Please.
Ho,
ho, ho.
Ho, ho, ho. And it's his birthday. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
To Dennis Palumbo, who you must know by now, you regulars, because every year he writes another book. And every year we have him on, although he was just telling me he's...
Well, I don't know about the next one.
You really don't?
No, I don't.
Might it be done?
It might be, but I don't know. I usually tell myself, well, that's it, because this is the 5th book. And I think, well, that's it. And then I'll be in the shower or something. I'll go, well, what would happen if someone did, and the moment I do that, I'm stuck. It looks like I have to do it then.
Okay. He's got, this is number 5 in a series. Following the exploits of forensic psychologists.
Yes, Daniel Rinaldi is a clinical psychologist, and more importantly, he's a trauma expert, and so he consults with the Pittsburgh police. His job, essentially, is to treat victims of violent crime, people who may have survived the home invasion or the sexual assault or the carjacking, but they've been traumatized by the experience. And I think in a lot of crime novels and on television shows, we follow the crime, we go after the criminal, but we don't pay too much attention to the victims. And the reality is most people, even if they've survived, let's say, an armed bank robbery, they're traumatized for months and years afterwards, and they have many of the symptoms we associate with PTSD. They'll have eternal vigilance about violence. They'll be afraid every time they hear a twig snap. They'll have recurring nightmares about the event. And so I wanted my hero to have a mission, which would be to treat those people. And so in the beginning of the series, we're in the 5th book now, in the very beginning of the series, we realize or we find out that years prior, he and his wife had been coming out of a restaurant. They get mugged. Gunfire erupts. His wife is killed. Daniel Rinaldi's injured, but he survives. As a result, he has survivor guilt, which is something that a lot of people who are in horrible events, like the gun shootings we've been seeing lately and stuff, as horrible as it is for the victims and the families of the victims, people who survive often have survivor guilt. Why am I alive and the person next to me dies? And so my hero, Daniel Rinaldi, felt that. And as a result, his mission is to treat victims of violent crime. Now, he's also an amateur sleuth, as you are in these kinds of novels. And so he gets, inevitably, he gets involved in these high-profile cases, much to the chagrin of the police department with whom he has a contract, but they don't like him very much.
Right.
And so he's always at odds with them. And they really don't like him because he ends up getting so involved. He gets kind of a reputation. He ends up being one of those talking heads you see on CNN and stuff.
He's getting more attention than they are.
He's getting more attention than they are. So they're always looking for a way to cancel his contract, or as they say, punch his ticket.
But of course, he's always showing them up.
Well, he's always showing them up. He has a lot of respect because his dad was a cop. He has a lot of respect for the police department and a grudging relationship with a number of detectives. But the head of robbery homicide, Lieutenant Bigler, is a real enemy of his and wants to get rid of him. And so the tension of all those characters, for me, is the fun part. The other part of writing the book I like is that all the books take place in Pittsburgh, my hometown. And I think of Pittsburgh itself as a character because it's undergone such a change.
Really? Yeah.
It really, really has. I mean, my longtime readers know I talk about this all the time, but I think of Pittsburgh as a shot in a beer town that's collided with the information age.
True.
And, the steel mills I worked at when I was working my way through Pitt are all gone now.
Yeah.
And so the city has undergone this strange metamorphosis, and my hero has a foot in the old world and a foot in the new.
Well, it's just perfect. That's why I have to tell you, I think you must have a huge readership here because, I mean, not only are the plots, whatever, they keep you enthralled and entranced and on edge, but it's so much fun to be able to see everything because you know the town.
Well, that's the thing is I like to think I know the town, though I have to tell you, it's really funny. I get a lot of emails and letters from people, my Pittsburgh readers, and nobody ever talks about the characters or the plot. They always say, you can't make a left on South Street.
Yeah, right, exactly. Or you can't see the Cathedral of Learning from that building.
Yes, they always tell me.
What the hell are you? Yeah, right.
But the most interesting one I got is from a city planner. She had read the first 3 books. 3 had come out at that point, and she sent me an email and said, I really like your books, but my hero has an office on Forbes Avenue in Oakland, and he lives in Mount Washington. And so she wrote me and said, I'm a city planner, and the way you have Daniel Rinaldi go home from his office is so ridiculous, I can't read it anymore. So she sent me a diagram of how he should actually go. And so I used it in the next book, and I gave her an acknowledgement in the beginning of the book for thanks to, and I won't say her name here, but thanks for showing Daniel Rinaldi the best way to go home. And I use that now.
Well, now wait, what would it be? So from Forbes, you would go to...
I had him...
You have to go across the Liberty Bridge.
Yeah.
Right,
and I think I had him going across...
Oh,
the Fort Bridge,
you
and then I had him.
You go to the Boulevard of the Allies to the Liberty Bridge,
and you have to remember, I haven't lived in Pittsburgh for over 40 years, so I'm working Google Maps, and a friend of mine here in town, I'll call him and go, "Is the William Penn Hotel still there?" No.
That's a student union.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Oh no, wait, is that the student union? No. This one, William Penn here.
Yeah.
Well, it is, isn't it?
Yeah, in fact, at Pitt, when I was at Pitt,
the
student union was called the student union. Now it's called something else. I don't even know what it is. Yeah, I was so pleased that the Hillman Library is still called the Hillman Library.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Listen, even those of us who live here can't keep up at the time.
I know. And so I'm always pleased when a Pittsburgh reader emails me or calls me or anything, and they're not telling me what I did wrong, about the city.
Hey, your next one, you should have a driverless Uber car go be hacked and go berserk, right? Something like that.
Well, it's so funny. Everyone, rightfully so, is upset because that driverless car hit that woman. And I was thinking about it flying here from L.A. because most planes, they're flown by automatic pilots.
They can be hacked.
Not only that, they're flown by automatic pilots. The pilots are sitting there talking to each other.
What's the pilot doing?
Yeah, the point is we've been using a lot of autopilots for years.
That's true. That's true.
I think they just take off and land,
I think that's pretty much true.
I think that's it.
And so you can't be, it's hard to be vigilant if you're sitting there, but you're really not doing anything.
Yeah.
I mean, they say, well, we have a human being in the driver's seat, but they're not doing anything, and then they're supposed to, though, be so on top of it that they can take action in a split second.
Yeah, and also, if a human driver were driving, apparently this woman just stepped out in front of the road.
Yeah.
Well, a human driver wouldn't have been able to stop either. So I think you have to take a little of this with a grain of salt.
No, my sense is that, she seemed to be at fault.
But I don't know.
What do we know? But we got the camera. Well, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Okay, so every year I must ask you the same questions over and over and over again, and I'm going to do it again.
With my memory, that works great
because
they're always new to me.
Okay, so we have now you are a Pittsburgh native, but I have to get your incredible sort of professional arc. What brought you to writing books like this? We got to get that down on the record because
Absolutely.
You were the screenwriter for one of my favorite movies.
Well, that's right.
My favorite year, which I just saw recently.
Oh my goodness!
God, it's good.
Thank you so much. I was the co-writer of My Favorite Year with Norman Steinberg, and I would say both of us agree that it was actually Peter O'Toole who made that film as great as it is.
Well, he was amazing.
He was wonderful.
But it wasn't just him. Oh my God, I loved everybody in that movie.
I think we were very lucky. We got a great cast, and I think it really, really, the cast helped us a great deal. Just to give a quick 2-minute bio, I went to Pitt, and then I came out to California.
Graduated in What?
English, yeah, in English. I was an English major, but there was also a writing department, and I had those wonderful teachers, Lee Gutkin, Montgomery Culver, all those great Pitt teachers.
Gee, Lee's a friend of mine.
Oh,
I didn't know he was. He was your teacher?
Yes, he was.
Oh, he won't want to hear that because
please.
he likes to say he's younger than I am, and he ain't.
No, he isn't. He was a teacher when I was there. In fact, we're still friends.
Okay.
Yeah,
Hey, Lee.
but anyway, and I came out to Los Angeles, and I was very lucky, and ended up writing on Welcome Back, Kotter. I wrote the first episode of Love Boat. Whenever I tell people that,
oh my God,
they always laugh, and then I say, "Yeah, but I just got a 13-cent residual check from the Balkans." So who's laughing now? The joke's on you.
You're still really? Are you seriously still getting?
I still get these little 13,
funny.
12-cent residual checks from all over Europe. It's hilarious.
Is so funny.
And then, I moved into movies. I did, as we talked about, my favorite year, a movie called K-9 with Jim Belushi, and a movie called Whitewater Summer with Sean Astin and Kevin Bacon. I was very, very lucky. And then, it's so ironic. What happened is I went into therapy myself. And as a patient in therapy, I fell in love with the process. So I started taking classes. I started volunteering in psych hospitals, not thinking, I'm going to change my career. I kept telling myself, well, for a writer, how bad can it be taking psychology classes? It can only help me as a writer.
Right.
Next thing you know, I end up getting my graduate degree. I start getting intern hours, and I'm thinking, am I really doing this? Am I really doing this? And then one day, I was still in film and television, but nobody knew I was in school. I was like Batman. By day, I was a screenwriter, and by night and on the weekends, I was going to class, and I was seeing patients as an intern therapist. And one day, I was having lunch with this producer at a restaurant on Sunset, and he was trying to get me to write this movie, and I kept looking at my watch because I didn't want to be late for getting down to the psych hospital. I was doing group psychotherapy with schizophrenics.
Oh, my God.
And I was driving down La Cienega on my way down there, and I thought to myself, I couldn't wait to leave the lunch to get down to the psych hospital. And I had kind of a road to Damascus experience when I went, I think I want to really do this. And literally till that moment, I didn't know. And at that moment, I went, okay, I'm going to do it. So I sat for my license, and it took 6.5 years.
This transition
to become a licensed therapist in California. And it takes a long time because you need 3,000 clinical hours as an intern before you can even sit for the test.
And you've been doing it for?
Now I've been doing it about 29 years.
Wow.
I've been in private practice. I retired from film and television.
But clearly you didn't retire from writing.
But I didn't retire from writing. And it's funny because when I was at Pitt as a writing major, my goal was not film or TV. My goal was to be a novelist. And so once I started my practice, and after I had built my private practice up, I thought, well, now I can start writing prose again. And so I started. And it took a while, but I had always wanted to write a series of mysteries because I'm a big mystery fan. And ever since I was 10 years old, and my dad brought me The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. I was sick in bed with the measles, I think, and he brought me one of those hardback things where you crack it open and it smells so good, and it was illustrated. And I'd never read a mystery before. And when I read Sherlock Holmes, I was hooked. I went, okay, this is great. And so I had always wanted to write a series of mysteries, and I always wanted to write about Pittsburgh. So it gave me the opportunity to do it.
Jeez.
So that's how it happened.
Living the dream.
Oh, yeah.
The other thing we should point out, though, is while in your therapy, you specialize in helping
creative people. Well, because I was in show business for so long, my practice is primarily writers, actors, directors, composers, people in the creative industry.
Oh, and we know they're messed up.
Well, they're no more messed up than anyone else. That, to me, always makes me crazy.
Well, but wait a minute. A creative person, so much of... You don't think in part they're creative because they're messed up?
No.
Really?
Well, I'll tell you. Look at the clinical evidence. There's so much research that's been done about this. Creative people have much less of a suicide rate or incarceration rate than lawyers, dentists, psychiatrists.
How about neurotic as opposed to psychotic?
Okay. Let me look at it. Let me just put it this way. If you're a bricklayer and you're depressed and you're unhappy, it doesn't affect your job. You still can put bricks in. If you're a creative person, your raw materials, your bricks, are your inner world.
Right.
So creative people tend to talk about and write from their inner experience.
Right. Okay.
And so they write about their I mean, look how many writers write about their depression. But they're not
comedians.
Yeah, it's like the creative people use all of their feelings inside. Right. And since I think everybody has operatic passions, but if you're a creative person, you talk about it. If you work at Walmart, you're less likely to talk about it.
Or nobody's listening.
Or nobody's listening. So if you I remember working one time doing a group therapy with a group of lawyers, and they seemed to me as neurotic as any creative person I'd worked with. But their persona that they present has to not look like that.
Gee, I think you turned me around.
Well, so I think creative people, the difference is they talk and write about and exploit their feelings. It's part of their process.
Right.
In fact, if we read a writer who or a painter or anyone whose work does not express their inner experience, it rarely relates to us. Emerson said that to know what's true for you in your private heart is true for everyone. That is genius.
Oh, wow.
And so the writers and actors and painters and directors who write and direct from their own obsessions, interests, or whatever, they're the ones who speak to all of us.
But as a therapist, are your patients or clients or whatever you call them, are they more, articulate perhaps than?
Well, I think
so. For you,
yeah.
that's sort of you don't have to listen to somebody who's boring talking about their lives.
I'm very, very lucky in that creative people who seek therapeutic help tend to be interested in self-exploration.
Right.
And they're very articulate, often quite funny. Right. In fact, when I work with a lot of creative patients, I have to help them not try to entertain me and use that gift they have had to protect themselves all their lives, which is to be funny or smart.
Now
or
you sound like my therapist.
Yeah, and so I always have to say,
you don't have to be
you
on.
You don't have to be on. You can just relax here and not perform.
But that is their defense.
That is, it's the primary defense, and remember, it's the defense that has worked for them.
Right.
If you were picked on as a kid and then you got funny, and so everyone thought you were a funny person, you're going to keep being funny.
You betcha.
Because that's your best defense mechanism.
Right.
So then you go to therapy and go, I don't know what to do. I feel sad, but everyone thinks I'm so funny. And then they'll be funny about how depressed they are. And I understand that. I used to write comedy. And the one thing I know about people who write comedy, we're mad and we're sad. We're grief, and there's grief and gruff. You know what I mean? I've never met a funny person who was a happy person. You know, and because the root of so much humor is
pain.
Rage and pain. It's pain
right.
and rage.
Right.
And when people say to me, "Gee, how could you write such dark stories?" And my stories are, psychological thrillers.
God.
And there's a lot of really intense, harrowing things.
I want to talk to you about that.
Well, we can talk about it
all
because
right.
that's where it goes. There's a reason I'm not on top of a building with a sniper rifle.
You get it all out.
I get it all out in my books.
Yeah, but then you put it in my head.
Well, that's your problem. Once you put down your money, that's your problem.
I gotta tell you, how the hell, what craziness is in your head that you can come up with these psychopaths? This guy.
Yeah, he's the worst villain I've ever written. He's the worst villain I've ever written.
Oh my God.
And he's so much fun. For me, he was so much fun to write.
Not for me.
Because he was every dark thought, feeling that I've ever had in my life. And early on in the book, if you remember, I say this was the most Daniel writes, the books are written in the first person.
Right.
And so when Rinaldi says this was the most horrible and harrowing experience of my life, I thought to myself, well, after 5 books, it better be damn harrowing. And so I went to the very edge of where my own darkness is to write, especially the climax. The climax of the book is pretty intense. But it's very exciting, and I've been so pleased. The reviews have been amazing, and they all talk about this villain, Sebastian Maddox.
Oh,
and he's
God.
a scary guy. He's
oh
a scary
my God.
guy.
Do you think somebody? I mean, so I'm a Pollyanna in this way. I think one of the ways I'm able to get up in the morning and live my life and have, social interactions with other humans is because I refuse to acknowledge that there are people like this.
Yeah.
I mean, is this really?
Well, there
Is
are.
that,
I mean, if you look at how many people like Ted Bundy or the BTK killer, there are a lot of Richard Ramirez. There are a lot of Jeffrey Dahmer.
Oh, yeah.
There are a lot of really terrible people. The problem is there's such a minority that people who like crime fiction often think, oh, my God, every other person's a killer. Well, no, they're not. What amazes me is we have billions of people on this planet. How few of them actually do damage to each other is what we should really think about. Because that's what I think about.
Well, but doesn't television news and books like this skew people's sense of that ratio?
I think they can. I think also, though, the cathartic value, which has been true since there's been theater and there's been literature, is to have the hero, as he does in Head Wounds, come out on top at the end and remind us that there is an antidote to evil, which is good people doing good. And I think that that's important for us because we feel, I think, through the media and through experiences in the news, that we're being inundated with this kind of evil. And my feeling is actually, if you look at like how many millions of people are in a city and there's 5 murders that year and people are all up in arms. Really? Only 5 murders? It's amazing they're not all killing themselves.
No, and my understanding is that generally
crime is on the way down.
Way down.
Yeah, it's way down.
Yeah.
And so
people
the media
are living longer. I mean, but you wouldn't know it.
You wouldn't know it from the media, but actually the growth in terms of humanity, humanism, progressivism around the world is actually in a positive direction.
That's what I hear.
Yeah, but it doesn't feel like it.
No.
Because, see, if you go on the news and go, breaking news, nobody got killed today.
Right. That's
well,
right.
no one's going to watch it. They're going to switch over to Shark Tank.
That's right.
Because at least there, somebody's in conflict.
Well, but if I were a therapist, that is why I tell people, don't watch more than an hour of news a day, or at the very most. And I don't even think you need to watch any. You could just read.
Well, I think that it has been very bad for the sort of 24/7 news that we get. And the reality is, I remember the late Neil Postman, in a wonderful book called Amusing Ourselves to Death, made a very interesting point that like 200 years ago, news was your neighbor's barn burned down. So then you and a bunch of other people helped them rebuild the barn. You didn't know that the Boer War was happening on the other side of the planet.
That's right.
So news, even if it was bad, was something you could maybe rectify.
And was accessible and understandable.
It was accessible and understandable.
Right.
Now when we read, well, people are dying in Syria, you have the impotence of, I don't know what to do about it. What do I do? All I know is this is bad news that stresses me out. I feel terrible.
Right.
But I have no recourse. I don't know anyone in Syria. What am I supposed to do, fly to Syria? You know. So when you hear about a lot of news from all over the world about which you can do nothing, then it reinforces, as Postman points out, your sense of frustration and stress. And I think he's right about that.
I don't doubt it for a minute. Somebody asked me a question the other day, and I wondered what your answer would be. I was mentioning that you were going to be on the show, and I was talking about your latest, Head Wounds, and they said, well, should I start at the beginning? Should I read the first book? I said, well, ideally, I think you do.
Well,
but
here's the way they're all books. Each of the 5 books can be written. I'm sorry, can be read as standalone books.
Right.
Because if you need to know who someone is, I sort of explain in a paragraph who they are for people who may not know. The only reason, well, there's two reasons I'd like you to start from the beginning. Number one, I'd like you to buy all the books. But number two, if you've come to know the characters as they change and evolve and their relationships change and evolve, in Head Wounds, since a number of people who have been in the books from the very beginning are threatened, it means more to people who know them.
That's right.
Who followed them in all 5 books. So when something bad's going to happen to Noah Fry, well, by the time you're at book 5, you love Noah Fry.
Oh, we got to talk about Noah.
And so you don't want anything bad to happen to him. And so I think for Head Wounds, the people who have responded the most in terms of the feedback I've been getting are people who really like the character of Harvey Blaylock, really like the character of Angie Villanova, really like the character of Noah Fry. So when they are at risk,
it
means so much more.
That's true.
Yeah.
Oh, Noah. And Margie Romero, in her review, by the way, a rave review of the latest Head Wounds, says, Mr. Palumbo has invented a bar that would be fun to have in Pittsburgh. I mean, usually you're just dealing with what is here.
Yeah.
But you have this bar on a barge run by Noah, who is a former patient. It is just wonderful. I want it there.
Yeah, I decided to create a bar I'd want to go to. And what I did was, as I mentioned earlier, I worked at J&L Steel on 2nd Avenue. Well, those mills are all gone now. So what I did was I put Noah's bar, I call it Noah's Ark, and it's a converted coal barge that's moored on 2nd Avenue on the Monongahela River.
Right.
And so it still has like portholes and hanging tar paper and stuff. And the guy running the bar, Noah Fry, is a former patient of Daniel's from years and years before at a private psychiatric hospital. And he's Daniel's best friend, and he is a paranoid schizophrenic. And so without his medication, he's susceptible to delusions and hallucinations, and the delusions are persecutory. In the sense that that self-loathing that delusion has. In his case, he has, and this is based on a patient I had at a psychiatric hospital when I worked there for 3 years. I had a patient who had a crucifixion obsession, and his desire was to be crucified. And so that's Noah's delusion, and his meds keep that at bay. But the funny thing about Noah, he's a very talented jazz musician, and he functioned in the book as what the indigenous people call crazy wisdom. He's crazy, but he's smart. And I mean, he says something, for example, in Head Wounds that I just love. He talks about how the people who come to his bar, they sit at the counter all day, all night long, and complain about what they should have done and the mistakes they made, and they wish they lived here, or they wish they'd married someone else. And he says to Daniel at some point, you know what the problem is? You know why nobody's happy? Everybody thinks the party's happening somewhere else. And I thought, that's the kind of thing a crazy person with wisdom would say.
That's right.
And so when he talks to Daniel, he's often wiser than Daniel is, because Daniel has blinders on. If somebody's in trouble or traumatized, whatever, he has a big hero complex because he still thinks he has to earn.
That's from the guilt.
From the guilt, right.
Guilt.
And in fact, as I say in Head Wounds, he didn't understand his luck in surviving, and that he had been trying to earn that luck ever since. So one of the reasons he throws himself into dangerous situations to the chagrin of his friends and colleagues is he does have a little bit of a hero complex.
Well, he has to prove that
he deserves to live.
Right.
And so Noah Fry is always saying to him, you don't have to prove anything. It's okay. It's so nice to see a big story on the news and you're not in it. And so he's sort of the stabilizing force. And of course, the irony is he's crazy.
Are therapists, are you as a therapist ever helped by the insights of your
all
client?
The time.
Okay.
I think the patient-therapist relationship is a two-way dynamic. I think any therapist who assumes he or she has a lock on how to live life is a therapist you don't want to have anything to do with. I think we're all broken. And a therapist, hopefully, can help you have some tools to deal with how you're broken. And the therapist goes to see someone to get tools for how he or she is broken. And that's what it's about. And one of my big pet peeves is therapists who rely too much on diagnostic labels as opposed to seeing each person as an individual. I mean,
I think that's true of medicine in general.
Yeah, but my feeling is I have no problem, for us to have a common vocabulary so all of us clinical geniuses can talk to each other. But saying that someone is bipolar doesn't tell me who they are. It's just a way for you to label behavior in a way that's understandable and can be conveyed to another professional. But to think of that person, instead of calling him George in your head, you think, oh, my 3 o'clock, my bipolar's coming. If your bipolar's coming, you shouldn't be this person's therapist. It should be, oh, George is coming. It should be the person, because you're a person. And you and your patient co-create the therapy.
Yeah.
And I think that as a result, I mean, that's comes from a very, my tendency, my theoretical position is pretty experiential. It's pretty humanistic. I don't assume I know more about what's inside the patient than they do. The only thing I can do is talk to them about, here's what they're presenting. Here's what I think about what they're presenting. I know this is causing them pain because they give how they're feeling a particular meaning. And I'm saying, let's challenge what that meaning is.
Geez, I bet you're a good therapist.
Well,
I bet you are.
People come and see me. So,
yeah, man. But labeling, I don't know, while you were talking about how, oh, my bipolar's coming in it too, I thought of the first time I saw in a sports page that some Steeler, so-and-so is out with a groin. Out with a groin. I thought, what? He couldn't find a nice, nice woman to go out with? Out with a groin, out with and that annoyed me so much. But that's where my head went. I don't know what that means. Let's go to the emails. Gigi says, just tuned in. So delighted to again hear Dennis Palumbo on your show. I love hearing you guys talk. I love his books. Thank you for brightening the day for a change, right?
Well, thank you so much. Boy, that's really nice. And nice. Your check is in the mail.
Mike in D.C., can you ask Jim, not Jim, I screw his name up all the time, but it ain't Jim, that much I know, it's Dennis, about his experience with the musical My Favorite Year? And were you happy with the outcome? I didn't even know there was.
Yeah, that's because it closed in 4 weeks. That's an interesting experience. I had actually nothing to do with the musical.
I would imagine.
Yeah. I mean, they had to come to me and make, a deal because I have the sole story credit on My Favorite Year. So I have what's called separated rights. I don't own the movie, so I can't stop them if they want to make it a cartoon, but they have to pay me. And so we made a deal, and then
So you did make some money off this thing.
I still do. What happened is the musical was actually, it was a big attempt, a nice attempt, and it was at Kennedy Center. I went to see it, my wife and I went, and it ran for about 4 or 5 weeks. I don't think it was very successful, and there are a couple reasons for that, which I don't think I want to go into, but just aesthetically, I have some ideas as why it might not have gone so well. And I think Tim Curry's a wonderful actor. I think he was miscast.
Oh, so he was in the Peter O'Toole
role. He was in
role.
the Peter O'Toole role. He's a wonderful actor. I think in this case he was miscast. But it only ran for 5 or 6 weeks, like I said. But for some reason, high schools and community theaters around the world
this is why you're still making
money.
Are
doing it. And so it's so terrific to get these royalty checks. And they have photos of like high school kids with like the Alan Swan outfit on, and they're 16 years old.
How cute.
And so I love those photos from all these high schools and community theaters all over the world that put on the musical of My Favorite Year.
How wonderful! So there's who wrote this song? I mean, there's songs.
I can't. Yeah, there's.
Are they any good? Any of them?
For me, again, I don't want to talk too much aesthetically, but I think it's important to know that the people who wrote the music, whose names I forgot, unfortunately, went on to write their next musical called Once on an Island, that became a gigantic Broadway success.
And man, that is done by high schools, left, right.
Yeah. I was just, you know how you're in the lane in traffic and one person gets right in front of you and then they go through the light and you're at the red light?
Yes, it happens all the time.
Well, somehow my musical missed the light.
Yeah.
And their next musical was a gigantic hit. And so... Right. But yeah, so I had nothing. I didn't write a word of it. I had nothing to do with it at all.
Okay, I'm moving. I just noticed something from Margie's review. It says he brands the Pittsburgh area, that's you, as vaguely racist. Quote, where ethnic pride and ethnic prejudice lived side by side.
Yeah, I thought I was going to get a little comment about that.
Listen, I wouldn't say vaguely.
Yeah.
No, I think this is a very racist area, extremely racist.
Well, I don't think it's particular to Pittsburgh. I don't think it's particular.
Let's say, have we learned that
I was going to say, if
southern,
anything,
northern, or anything, or urban, rural? It is everywhere.
If the Barack Obama presidency proved anything, it's that we're not post-racial. We're actually much more racist than we actually thought.
Oh, my God.
And if you look at, like, Roy Moore's election, he got 75% of the white vote. And apparently pedophilia doesn't disqualify you as long as you're a white person. So I think I have, so much love for Pittsburgh, and anyone who reads the books can feel it in the books.
Yep.
But I do talk about the what I call the ethnic pride and ethnic prejudice that do live side by side.
If you don't recognize it, then you're, I'm sorry, blind.
Well, I don't feel like my point of view on anything is the point of view. It's just my point of view. And if you can love something the way I love the city and still be aware of things that need work.
But if you can love it all, I mean, what's perfect? There's not anyone we love is not a perfect person.
That's right.
But any city we love is not perfect. I love Pittsburgh. You left. I threw my lot in with this city.
I left because they don't make film and television in Pittsburgh.
They
do now, but they didn't 45 years ago when I left. Believe me, they sure as heck didn't. And now you could actually, who's that guy? Carl Kurlander. I mean, they're doing stuff here all the time. Pittsburgh, everybody shoots movies here, too, because the tax breaks are so good. It's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous.
And when you think of This Is Us, Jack Reacher, Unstoppable, all these, films and TV shows are shot. Mindhunter, they're all shot in Pittsburgh.
Pittsburghers will tell you, I mean, especially those of us, I think, downtown. I mean, it's every other minute.
Yeah,
you can't, I mean, they're shooting something.
Yeah, they shot The Dark Knight Rises here, too.
The alley right next door to this building is where and Smithfield, this is where the big chase scene happens. And what's funny is, again, if you know the city, they're chasing and chasing. They're going up Smithfield, back Smithfield, which makes no sense at all.
Yeah.
You see storefronts that and you think, wait a minute. I mean, Wiener World, which is, right here, that's in. And so's the parking ramp opposite. And it is fun. It is fun to see. Yeah, there are people, definitely movies are happening here. Oh, gosh. So, listen, I got to ask you, I'm really sorry. But has your business ticked up a little bit since Donald Trump's been president? I mean, he's been good for, listen, I'm on the ACLU board. It's been good for us in a way. I'm on a Planned Parenthood board. He's been good for us in a way.
It's funny. To be honest with you, I've been very fortunate. My practice has been pretty steady and full for quite a while because people in the entertainment business
talk about you.
Know about me.
Yeah.
So, but ever since the election, there's been a kind of a sea change in the work. in the sense that the Trump administration is kind of a background hum to everything. So no matter what a patient is going through, like a divorce or their kids in rehab or their series didn't get picked up, for the first 10 minutes, they have to talk about the latest thing they're outraged about.
It's true.
It's like they have to do it. Well, that went on for about a year, and now there's it's what I call revelation burnout.
It's just, or exhaustion.
And they're just exhausted. So now people come in and they go, I don't even want to talk about it. And I know what they're talking about. We don't even have to say the word Trump. They just come in and go, I know, did you see? And I go, yeah. And they go, I don't want to, I know, talk about it. And we go right into their personal issues or right into their career problems or whatever, with just the acknowledgement that we're in a little bubble outside of which we have the strangest, inexplicable administration in the history of modern times.
Yeah.
And so we just act like we don't. And one of the things that occurred to me early after the election, when so many people would come in and spend literally half hour of the 50 minutes talking about
when they're supposed to be helping themselves.
Yeah. And I finally said, look, you're giving him that too.
Yeah.
You're giving
Think
him
of the power you're giving
him the power to so infiltrate your inner world that you can't even deal with your own stuff. Don't give him that too.
Right.
And I understood it because I was halfway through Head Wounds and I just stopped writing because I was thinking about it all the time. And then I told myself, don't give him that. What, are you give him your novel? What the heck's that?
See? Well, I told you I took February off. I had to take it off because he had taken over.
Well, because you talk about it here every day, too.
I thought, I don't know if I can keep doing this because I felt like Donald Trump is killing me.
Well, you know, they often tell therapists, watch out for empathy burnout. Well, the same thing is true, I think, for revelation burnout. What did he say this time? What happened this time? And then you start, looking at the fact that he's appointed people to head departments who are the enemies of the missions of each of those departments.
That's absolutely true.
So you say it's not even Donald Trump. It's that the stuff he's unraveling will take years to reconstruct if they're reconstructed. And so once you open up like national parks for resources, you're not going to close them again. I mean, so, we have a Department of Education head who doesn't like education. Apparently it's the enemy. So I'm so baffled by it. And it doesn't feel like a left wing or right wing or conservative or liberal. It feels so inexplicable.
What's your advice? I keep telling, after I came back with my head in a better place, I told people, I think I did tell you that I'm going to have to, not be as reactive as I've been, or I can't do
well,
this
if you're
anymore.
diabetic, you reduce your sugar intake.
Right.
It's better for your health. I think for your mental health, reduce your news intake, particularly because the news tends to glamorize the conflicts between people. The entertainment part of the news.
That's right.
And it's not just Fox News. It's CNN,
Everybody.
It's MSNBC. Everybody's got a team. It's like you're rooting for the Rams as opposed to rooting for the Eagles. And the reality of that is that it keeps you feeling as though nothing's going to hold. The center isn't going to hold. We're all going to hell in a handbasket. I had a patient who took a hike on Topanga Canyon in Los Angeles, and I said, did you enjoy the hike? He said, yeah, I told myself in case of a war with North Korea, this was probably the last hike I'd ever take. And I thought, oh my God.
That's not enjoying the hike.
No, that's not enjoying the hike. So what I suggest to people is really seriously just, you have to cut down on carbs, cut down on the news. Just limit yourself to how much news you can watch and listen to.
How do you feel about certain people in your profession and even the psychoanalytic profession and sort of going against what has been the rule, which is you don't diagnose somebody that you don't see, and you certainly don't do this in a public fashion. And there are a lot of pretty high up character's saying this is different.
I know.
And this guy is a raging narcissist and he's dangerous.
Well, here's my feeling about that. I'm very old-fashioned about this. I don't believe you interpret, diagnose, or talk about someone you've never met, let alone treated.
True.
You shouldn't talk about them anyway. Even if a part of me clinically kind of agrees with these assessments, it's not my place to do that. And I think it's dangerous because then people start using terminology that they don't really understand. And I think it sort of creates a bad precedent. I just don't feel if I were someone watching one of these psychologists or psychiatrists interpret psychologically or make a clinical diagnosis of a public figure from a president on down, I would think to myself, well, gosh, I guess there isn't any confidentiality when you go to therapy. Or they can all sit around and talk about you.
That's right.
I mean, as much as I love The Sopranos, the second to the last episode of The Sopranos, for anyone who saw that episode, there was a bunch of psychiatrists, including the one played by Lorraine Bracco, who was Tony Sopranos, and her psychiatrist, played by Peter Bogdanovich. And there was a dinner party with a bunch of psychiatrists all guessing who each other's patients were. And I was flabbergasted because that kind of dinner party does not exist. Nobody does that. And so anything that reinforces the idea that confidentiality is kind of loose, or that if you have a degree, you can diagnose someone you've never met or never seen, I think is a very bad precedent. I just, I think it's really a problem. And I think I see people using terminology all the time. The thing that gets me now are people will go like, oh, did you see Bob? He's so on the spectrum.
Oh, on the spectrum.
It's
man.
What? You're an expert now on autism? How did that happen? And so I'm really kind of an old stick in the mud about clinical propriety. I just think there's no propriety in clinical professionals going on television and making pronouncements about the mental health of political figures.
There was some woman, academic, has written some kind of a study or a book in which she contends, and I see where you'd get to this point, that libertarians, people who are libertarians, are on the spectrum.
Oh. Well,
I mean, think about it.
Okay.
I
remember years and years ago when the idea of being codependent was very big, being about a codependent.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing on the radio, this goes back 30 years, I think, some psychologists going, well, actually, I believe 98% of Americans are codependent. And I thought to myself, that's like saying 90% of Americans walk around on 2 feet.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's that many people,
it's
not a diagnosis.
Right.
That is meaningless. It's like 98% of Americans see through their eyes. I mean, I don't know what that means. And so we have to be very careful when diagnostic categories, and I think, for example, bipolar's turning into one of those, where everyone's talking about how bipolar they are or how bipolar someone else is. And I'm there, why? Because they were cranky this morning or because they had a stupid idea last week? Again, I know I'm very hidebound about this stuff, but I just think people should be very careful, including clinicians, about using diagnostic labels.
Do you think there's overdiagnoses going on of like...
Of course there are. I mean,
constantly.
We'll look at us as therapists, for example. If a patient comes early, he's anxious. If a patient comes late, he's resistant. And if he comes on time, he's obsessive.
Oh, for God's sake. So you're screwed.
So you're screwed in any way. There's no way to there's no way to come to therapy that doesn't have a diagnostic interpretation to it.
Oh my God. Actually, I'm seeing my therapist at 4 o'clock.
There you go.
Which one of those. Oh, I do.
Let me see. If you
That's
show up
funny.
at 4, she'll go,
compulsive.
compulsive.
She's showing
Yeah, compulsive, right here on time. Oh, it's 5 after 4? She doesn't want to come to therapy today. And then you go in and go, yeah, the traffic was really bad. And the therapist thinking, resistance.
Sure.
Yeah, resistance.
Oh, God.
Isn't that funny?
Sorta.
Yeah. It's sort of funny without the ha-ha part.
Oh, my God. So Unfortunately, he's not going to tell us the names of his clients.
No, I
his
can't do
patients.
that.
No,
Unfortunately,
must
no.
be something.
I remember one time I was on a show, and someone said, "Could you tell me the name of patients who are no longer with you?" And I went, "No."
No.
And then he said,
Dad?
"Could you give me their initials?" And I said, "No."
No. Isn't that something?
I know, it's really something. The first when I wrote a book called Writing from the Inside Out, which is a book about the psychological issues that writers deal with. And an editor from Parade magazine called and said, "We're going to talk about your book. We're going to make your book a bestseller." And so I talked to her and stuff, and then she came back and said, "My boss needs to know the name of some of these patients." And I said, "Well, I can't do that." And she said, "Well, then we can't run your story because we don't care about you. We care about the people you see."
Yes,
so,
it's a great journalistic organ.
Yeah.
Parade.
And so
magazine.
I went, okay. And so I told my agent, because he was crestfallen. He said, "Oh, if we were in Parade magazine, we'd sell a zillion copies." I said, "Yeah, but I'm not going to say who anybody's name
No,
is."
of course not.
And so he went, "Oh." And it was one of my little brushes with fame.
So I've got to let people know that that you're popping up all over town today, and in part it says actually tomorrow there's a free mystery writing workshop.
Well, there's two of them today at 12:30.
Is that going to be
is
the
a
same
free
time?
mystery? I'm going to present a free mystery writing workshop at the Pitt University campus store. So I'll do that free workshop and then do a book signing. Okay. And then tonight at the Mystery Lovers Bookshop in Oakmont, I'm just going to do a signing. And then tomorrow at the Monroeville Public Library, I'm going to do another mystery writing workshop and signing.
And that's from 1 to 2:30.
That's from 1 to 2:30.
And
Mystery Lovers tonight is at 7.
And 12:30.
And 12:30 today. In a couple hours, I'm going to be at the Pitt
campus
University
Pitt bookstore.
Bookstore on Forbes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And I mean, in those, so you get.
Well, my feeling is for people who want to write mysteries, they're often intimidated because they think, well, I don't know how to write great plots, or I don't know how to construct mysteries. And the reality is most people read crime stories because they're interested in the stakes of the characters, in being involved in their lives. Henry James said, "Plot is character under stress." And one of the things that I do in my Daniel Rinaldi novels is I lean toward characterization and suspense. And you don't have to be Agatha Christie to write mystery novels. You really need to get the reader to relate to the characters. If you like, for example, Michael Connelly's Harry Bosch novels, I love those novels. He's written about 20 of them. I couldn't tell you the plot of any one of them. I just want to hang with Harry Bosch, you know? And I think that that's the thing that makes us fans of a book series or a television series. I mean, if you look at Law & Order SVU, it's been on for 20 seasons. And it's because we like Mariska Hargitay, or we like the other detectives, and we want to see them get the bad guy. But it's very hard to remember what the clue was that got the bad guy last week. There needs to be one, but it's not the prime reason we watch. And in mystery series, it's not books, it's not the
it's the characters, then.
It's the characters. I mean,
and their development.
And their development. Look at the late Sue Grafton with her Kinsey Milhone novels. She's written 25 of them. And most people could not tell you the plot of each of those books. They just want to hang out with Kinsey Milhone. Who wouldn't? And so I think that is one of the things I'm going to emphasize in the workshop, is to use who you are and what matters to you, and then make the stakes very big, make the suspense very big, and put 1 or 2 clues in. Not a million, 1 or 2. And if you're the kind of person that likes puzzles, make your story more puzzle or plot-oriented. If you're the kind of person who likes characters, make your story more character-oriented. And I think that if you work with who you are, you'll have a much better chance of connecting to your reader.
Do you always do they have to have things plotted out, or do you sometimes sort of learn yourself as you're writing where this is going to go? Do you have to know where you're going to end up before you
There's
start?
many different ways to do it. I do not outline or plot. I never know where the books are going. I don't know who the victims are. I don't know who the bad guy is.
Really? When
No.
you start?
Yeah, because
What do you know when you start?
what I know is what I want it to feel like, or what I want to write about. Like once I knew about
Like
it.
with this,
Yeah,
with
with this.
Head Wounds. What
Once
did you
I
know?
The only thing I knew was I wanted the villain. I wanted us to know who the villain was early on, which I've never done before, and I wanted it to be about erotomania, which I had read about. When I did my novel Night Terrors, it came because I read an article that said night terrors, which has primarily been a pediatric diagnosis, is being diagnosed more and more in adults because adults are more stressed. Well, I thought, well, then who would have more night terrors than an FBI profiler who spent 20 years sitting across the desk from the worst people in the world? All I knew was that it was going to be about an adult, and it was going to be an FBI profiler with night terrors. But I didn't know the plot. I never do. And part of the fun for me, because I'd rather write than think, and so if the fun for me is just to follow my nose, and if I'm surprised, I figure the reader will be surprised. Now, I'll be honest, that's a very labor-intensive way to write, because you end up having to rewrite a lot.
I bet you write yourself into
I write myself into corners
and
all the time, and then when I finally, about page 200, go, okay, the bad guy's this guy, I have to go back and rewrite and seed in a lot of, red herrings and stuff. So the plotting work usually happens in the second draft. I tend to just follow my nose.
Wait a minute, though. Red herrings.
Yeah.
So you got to have red herrings, which are to throw me, the reader,
is
off.
To throw you off, to make you think X person did it when in fact Y person did it.
Yeah, but those people who read these things all the time, they recognize a red herring when they see it, don't they?
Well, that's the funny thing. When you're a very veteran mystery reader, like I am, because I've read thousands, I know the first person who looks guilty is never the guilty one. And one of the things that I admire about some of the early Agatha Christie novels is she turns that on its head. She'll have the person who looks guilty
actually
be guilty, because the reader goes, well, it can't be her. She looks too guilty. And so you go all the way away from it, and you come back and go, oh, my God, it was her.
For God's sake.
Yeah. I always like that.
You haven't ever done that.
No, I've never done that. And in fact, as I said, even though my books tend to be described as thrillers, they're always whodunits as well, except for Head Wounds. It's the first book where I said who the bad guy was very early on.
So it's not a whodunit, it is a thriller.
It's a straight-ahead thriller. It's a cat-and-mouse game between the villain, who we meet fairly early on, and the hero, Daniel. And he's the scariest villain I've ever written. One of the greatest compliments.
Talk about night terrors. Did you have night terrors when you were writing this?
No, writing it, no. It was such a cathartic experience for me to say, okay, what would be the worst thing he could do in this situation? And so I would think of it. And one of the greatest compliments I've ever gotten was from a mystery writer I love, Thomas Perry, who is a big Edgar Award-winning writer. And he wrote a nice blurb for this book and was interviewed a couple months later on the best books he'd read recently. He mentioned Head Wounds and said, I'm still haunted by the villain of this book.
No,
I can't get him out of my mind.
No.
And so I thought, well, good job.
Yeah, really. No, this is the worst.
This is the worst person I've ever written. There's no question.
Well, maybe that's why you're having trouble writing another.
Well, yeah, and whatever I write next, even my editor said, could we just calm it down for the next one?
It's just so this is the book, Head Wounds. And go to a bookstore and buy it. Get up off your couch.
Yes.
Don't go to Amazon, for God's sake. Although you can. Obviously, you can.
You can buy it through Amazon. You can buy it through the publisher, Poison Pen Press. I also recommend going to my website, DennisPalumbo.com, because there's a lot of articles about writing. There's all the reviews of all my books. And so if you're on the fence about whether this is the kind of series you want to read, I would go to my website, and you can make a determination then.
All right. He's at the Pitt Bookstore in an hour and a half. He's at Mystery Lovers Bookshop in Oakmont at 7 tonight.
Yep.
And he's at the Monroeville Public Library at 1 till 2:30 tomorrow.
By the time I leave, people in Pittsburgh are going to be sick of me.
No, we're never sick of you. Well, I hope you keep writing because I love these annual visits.
Well, I love coming here, Lynn. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Dennis Palumbo, Head Wounds, the most recent. Thank you so much. I just love you. And you guys, I want to leave you with 2 words. John Bolton! Ah! Okay, bye. Have a nice weekend.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.